Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I know it's been a while. I am so excited. This conversation has been literally months in the making. Joan, my friend Joan, came to my rescue when I was running for office, and I was talking about my concerns with mental health. And people thought, oh my goodness, how could you be concerned about mental health? It's the most important thing there is. And Joan happens to be a mental health professional who formally is from Utah. And she jumped on and explained a lot of things. And I believe that Utah is pretty strongly targeted. People are surprised by that because we are supposedly a quote unquote red state, a conservative state. But I think that you'll find this conversation extremely enlightening. Joan is just amazing, wonderful person with a lot of really brilliant insights. So thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome, Joan.
Oh, thanks, Carrie. This is awesome. I'm just glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. I just want to jump in and talk about first the state of mental health in Utah, kind of where you've seen it.
Well, right. And I think we're talking about teenagers and youth. Is that
Yes.
what you're thinking? Or
Yes.
um, well, Utah is not that different from the rest of the country. We lag behind California by probably 5 years. So whatever we in California, we can tend to see in Utah. Utah has the advantage of more intact and strong families. So that's the thing that is all the research shows that if you have an intact family, that is your very best resilience factor for everything. So that is helpful. One of the things that's a little bit of a concern in Utah is people in Utah tend to be a little bit laissez-faire about, hey, the public school is going to take care of it, and they've got mental health counselors at school. They know what they're doing. I don't. And so I think and I think a lot of Utahns have been trained to be pretty acquiescent. It's like, oh, that's my home teacher down the street. He's teaching my, social studies and so I think a lot of that goes on. That in Utah, we tend to be more peaceful people, a little more acquiescent. We don't really want to get up in people's faces. And for that reason, I think we are targeted because we're a bunch of really nice people that don't get up in arms very often. And what that means is that I think there's a lot of parents and families that haven't been as motivated and alert to the problems that we have in most of the public schools in Utah, and that means mental health. So one of the big things you have to consider as you live in Utah or wherever, you have to realize that anytime you have a government mental health counselor, that government mental health counselor, if it's in the public schools or you're doing it through government subsidies or community services, that that mental health counselor has to be secular. They cannot bring any kind of approach that may align with your religious values. Now that I think is very interesting because it used to be years ago that we as mental health counselors were trained to be culturally competent. And if we're talking to, a Catholic Latino, then we approach things from there. But that really isn't how it is anymore with a lot of issues. A lot of the issues are straight affirmation of the child's preference, no matter the family's culture. And I think a lot of families in Utah would be surprised by that. A lot of families in Utah, they're fairly conservative religion. We've got great amount of Catholics. We've got other religions, even Muslim, that have these real strong cultural traditions. A mental health counselor in a school, they can't honor that. They will, in a very de facto way, violate that family's culture. And I don't think the average parent gets that. They're like, oh, my kid will go to the counselor at school and it'll be great as somebody that lives down the street. Yeah, like no, because that counselor um, is constricted, and that counselor is required to abide by the ethical codes and the parameters of their professional organization. And those professional organizations, if you get on their websites and look about what those professional organizations are advocating, it is really scary. It's not anything that the average parent would be supportive of. And so even though the person that's helping the school may be your neighbor, they are pretty much helpless because they are bound by the ethical codes of their parents. And those professional boards, like many professional boards, have been co-opted by politics.
Right.
And so even your pediatrician may not personally be in favor of affirming gender dysphoria, but because that pediatrician is part of that Academy of American Pediatrics, and they have come out extremely with, aligning with the WPATH protocols, that your pediatrician is pretty helpless. And it's an insidious corruption of the professional relationship between you and a client. As a mental health counselor, the same thing occurs just in private practice. I mean, in any kind of a clinic, same thing. If you want to take your child to somebody who isn't corrupted or co-opted by those politicized boards, you will have to go to someone in private practice, preferably someone older, that doesn't have to answer directly to a clinic, uh, staff meeting. And those are your very best bets. If you're like, man, I really do think my child could use some therapy, don't send them to the mental health counselor at school, because once they get in that pipeline, it's a very, very difficult pipeline to escape. Because if you don't affirm that child's whatever it is, then you will be reported. You will likely be reported to, the next mental health agency, which could be CPS, could be another government clinic. And then you get stuck in that pipeline as a parent. Good luck. So I think a lot of therapists that don't want to buy into that anymore. They don't want to be controlled by the political biases in their professional boards, but they want to do good work with kids that are troubled. They actually won't do quote unquote therapy. They'll do life coaching, and that's a way to it's a kind of a way to address the goals of the family, the goals of the child, but you're not doing it under the auspices of a politicized board. So there's that. I don't know if I've
No, I have
stirred the pot enough or not.
One, when you were talking about how you must affirm the child, what I find interesting is that a lot of people will go into therapy. They'll go in for something like, my kid doesn't turn in their homework, right? Or maybe they're not making a lot of friends or something like that. And they come out with a whole host of things. And that's different than affirming, because they were going in with a very specific thing that they needed help with. And they're coming out with links to the Trevor Project.
Right. Well, and that's the risk of getting in this part, because everything will be pathologized. Everything turns into a clinical problem, because that's how we're trained to look at things as clinicians instead of parents or clergy, or see what I'm saying? So once you start getting in that mental health pipeline, exactly right, they can throw the whole kitchen sink because things will be pathologized.
Do you have an idea about how many people are actually true believers? Because what I found is that when I talk to therapists, Some therapists are completely open. Yep, we're co-opted. This is what's going on. And other ones will just come after you and be cutthroat. They're lying. This isn't happening. We would never do. And then you spend some time going on those people's Facebook pages and you know exactly where they stand, but they have no problem with lying. So I would call those people true believers. How did they get there? When did this change?
Boy, that's a great question. I think I think around 2015 was kind of a tipping point for a lot of people. I think when the Supreme Court affirmed homosexual marriage, I think that that kind of um, broke the dike with a lot of things. As far as, boy, that was a bad pun. Um, but as far as just it really opened the floodgates, is what I meant to say.
Right.
And um, opened the floodgates for things. Now that was predicted by the justices on the Supreme Court that did not agree with that decision. They predicted that, and that's really exactly what's happened. It's that we don't just tolerate it and say that is an option. No, we will be compelled to affirm, celebrate, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Center is a big one.
Wait, you broke up right then. What did you say?
Right. Centering around. So centering around. One of the things that I've seen recently is we had the situation with the gentleman who dressed as a woman and is in the girls' dorms. And one of the things that people have been saying is, why would you not help the mentally ill? Why would you not help the vulnerable? And why are you protecting those who are quote unquote already safe? And that's really what's centering around.
Wow.
It's no longer just a simple, right? It's no longer just a simple, we are tolerant, you know, you do you in your own spaces, but don't come into ours. To me, that would be true tolerance. They want something much more than tolerance. They resent the people, they resent the young
right
who are already safe.
Right. And that's, I mean, that's kind of a whole nother issue, but that is what the justices that did not agree with the ruling, that's what they predicted. They predicted that the whole concept of what is normal and not normal, they didn't say it in those words, but the meaning would be shifted. That's what we're seeing, is suddenly we are not saying that safety of young women is the priority, that instead we have recalibrated, and it is the feelings of the people who are struggling with emotional issues that they are preeminent, even when it's a safety issue. See, to me, you know, safety should be a really top priority, and the feelings of someone who is that has some not just dysphoria but actual delusions, those that kind of perception needs to be not emphasized as normal. We need to do what we can to be helpful and supportive of any good progress, but safety of you know, the kids that just want to go to school and have the cultural expectation that they've had for the last 100 years, that's legitimate. That's legitimate.
Explain for anybody who's watching the difference between dysphoria. Can you explain what that would actually mean? Because you said dysphoria and delusions, but I think there's a lot of people who don't understand what dysphoria is.
Okay, so if I said dysphoria of religions, let me restate that. Just differences in religion. So we've got a number of
dysphoria and delusions. I'm sorry.
Oh, delusions. Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of overlap. Dysphoria basically says, I am unhappy with this situation. And a delusion says, I actually am a different situation.
Okay.
The delusion is where you believe something that is patently false on its face. That's a delusion, that you actually believe something that in reality is based in reality. But dysphoria says, yeah, I'm a girl, but I hate it. That's classic gender dysphoria. I hate being a girl. I don't feel like I want to be a girl. But the idea that, so that's classic. Now, again, like everything else, it may have shifted. The pop psych meaning of that may have shifted a bit. But that's the classic understanding of the difference between dysphoria, which means, just feeling bad about it. The difference between the opposite of euphoria, right? Euphoria is very happy. Dysphoria is very unhappy. Delusions are a different animal. But there is a lot of overlap with gender dysphoria. There's a lot of overlap.
What's the purpose of mental health? Like, what is the purpose of a mental health counselor or therapist or psychiatrist?
I like that. That's a great question. I think that's a great question. Basically, what researchers have found is that humans behave in many ways that are not 100% decisions. We behave in ways that are driven by underlying past issues, unresolved pain, events in our past that left us with core issues. And that pain in our past that has not been resolved and come today in a lot of behaviors, a lot of emotions. So that's the overall theoretical construct of a lot of counseling. Now there's some counseling that says, you know what, all that stuff is not that important. It's just what you're thinking in the moment. Let's change your thoughts, right? But most clinicians find that yes, that's true, but still the stuff that's coming up from the past influences your thoughts, right? So the whole premise of counseling is that there are beliefs, there are unresolved pain, there's memories, there's patterns from our past that we unconsciously replicate. And unfortunately, a lot of times, if we don't make those implicit memories, those implicit beliefs, if we don't unpack them and make them explicit, if we don't really understand, oh, this is why I have a big reaction every time a woman frowns at me. Oh, if we don't understand that, then we kind of replicate this whole pattern our whole lives, and it can be very self-defeating. We don't understand. We think we're crazy. We think we're evil. We think we're weak. We're not. We simply are in an unresolved state of pain from our past, and we're reenacting it over and over. And so what counselors do, most of them, will help that person look back on some things in their past that may be affecting them today and look at it with a lot of compassion. But you look at it as an adult. So interestingly, children tend to be more easily traumatized than adults. So I don't know if you remember when you're a little kid, you watched a movie that scared you spitless. And you just, and now you watch, it's not that big of a deal. Okay. But children are more easily traumatized for lots of reasons. One thing to be tough about that is children are very egocentric. What that means is when something happens, they tend to think, oh, it's my fault. My parents are getting divorced. Oh, I must not have been a good enough kid. The child gets sexually abused and they make it about them. There's like, oh, I did something wrong, and then a lot of times the abuser will feed into that, And it's a really sick dynamic. But then what happens? So that child carries that message or that core belief about themselves. They carry that for years, and a lot of things can happen in the meantime that are a mess. And but when they get into a decent counselor, the counselor can say, "All right, what did that 5-year-old start believing about themselves? I started believing I was helpless. I started believing I couldn't trust people. I started feeling I was dirty. I was feeling like everything was my fault." And then the counselor says, "You're 30. Let's look at that. Look at that little girl in that situation with that perpetrator. What would you tell that little girl?" And they just kind of go, "Oh, yeah, it's not your fault. You're a great kid. That perp was like totally," and they can feel that. But until you unpack all that implicit pain and give them the opportunity to repattern, to get new beliefs about what happened, until you do that, most of us just wander around life replicating all that pain and patterns to try to avoid it or prevent it. So a good counselor will unpack it and let that person assess it and go, "Oh yeah, here's some new beliefs that I can have." And then they teach them ways to repattern those experiences. So when people say, why go back to all that? You can't change the past. I say, oh, you can't change the events of the past, but you absolutely can change the interpretation of the past, what it means. That 5-year-old girl, her interpretation was, I'm helpless. I can't trust anybody. There's no good people in the world. Men are awful. That was her interpretation. And maybe you carried that interpretation for years. I can't trust people. I'm alone. Right. But then in good counseling, you say, okay, what's a different way that you can interpret that now? Well, obviously, that kid was a great kid. She was wonderful, the best. And that perp was the one that was like degrading, and he was right. And that changes everything. When you change the interpretation, it changes everything. And that's the power of good counseling.
Okay, so I completely understand where you're coming from with saying this, but I could also see somebody who wants to manipulate their patient saying the same things. I'm going to change the interpretation of what has happened to you.
Right.
I'm going
Right.
to turn you more into a victim,
Right.
which I think oftentimes is happening. What I see, please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I see is we are infantilizing. We are keeping people. So when I look at therapy, and I had a lot of it growing up with my background, when I look at therapy, I look at it as, we want you to be a contributing member of society who can deal with your problems, can look at them with truth and hold them in the right perspective. And today what I see is a lot of people, literally you walk in and you say, I can't turn in my homework, help. And they start digging in, well, maybe it's this. Maybe if you change your perspective, it's because your parents weren't there for you with this, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So how is it that it just seems like there's always a negative truth and a whole bunch of lie happening?
Well, and I think you're making a really good case for not allowing a random mental health counselor to get into your child's psyche. It is incredibly dangerous. It would probably, in a lot of ways, be better not to let a random counselor dig around in there, because he who's good with a hammer thinks everything's a nail. If they're looking for abuse and trauma and everything, there's many studies showing how the bias of a counselor will subconsciously be communicated to the client, and the client, wanting to please the counselor, will come up with something. It's well researched. So the counselor needs to be very, very well aware of their approaches and how if you go into counseling because you're trying to fix your own problems and then you project on other people, yeah, I actually felt like I didn't fit in when I was a teenager because I don't think I really, maybe my orientation was a little off. And then that's how they see all these teenagers, and they a lot of times, want to put themselves in that situation where they want to be a good influence, or an influence anyway. They want to save these kids. It's it's a very potentially dangerous situation. And so I really counsel parents to be exceedingly careful of who they trust their youth to, because so easily, just like you said, they can roll, spindle, and mutilate that psyche and look for what they want, their agenda projected on them, and and the damage is quite quite significant. Yeah.
Well, I was telling you before we went live, I was watching a few different TED Talks on restorative justice.
Mm-hmm.
They would say something and I would go, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then they'd say, and our second floor is about activism. Our second floor is about, how healthcare should be for everyone, how housing is a right. And I was just like, your second floor is exactly what you're trying to do. You get the door on one way. And then once you get up into that next level, you are literally turning children into activists.
Mm-hmm.
I hear over and over again the term change maker.
Mm-hmm.
Our job's to be change makers or transformative change.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that people understand that, because transformative to your kind of layperson just means I'm going to do something better.
Mm-hmm. Improved.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
dangerous to, in my opinion, it is dangerous
Mm-hmm.
to believe that you as another human being have all the answers for another person's life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And whenever I deal with youth, I really try to include the parents wherever I can. Because most of the time, if there's a problem, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the whole system is involved. The whole family system is involved, and certainly the solution should be that whole family system for youth. Now, for adults, you don't necessarily have to get your mother-in-law in there, but for youth, when they're going through all those intellectual and cognitive and emotional milestones, that they still need their parents, and their parents need to know what's going on. And I think if you have a child in therapy and the therapist is like, oh, nope, sorry, I can't tell you anything, um, that's what the professional boards will encourage you to do. They will do that. But there's still ways to work with the parents and to keep them generally apprised. There's also ways to build the relationship between the child and the parents, so that the counselor doesn't form a triangle and say, okay, parents over here, child over here, I'm in the middle. And that may be necessary for a while, but the whole point is to try to connect up those parents and that children in a healthy relationship, and not be a permanent wedge between those generations. And so a good therapist can figure out ways to encourage that child to reach out to the parents, even in the office, right? Keep it really safe. Coach the parents. This is how you need to listen so they'll talk. This is how you need to talk so they'll listen. You coach them so that they're prepared. You make it a very safe place. But the whole point is to, reunify and help that family system to be healthy, not to isolate that child, not to do things behind the parents' back. That to me is the biggest red flag. If people are saying, yeah, I need to do everything behind the parents' back and I'm keeping them in the dark. Nope. That for youth, that's unethical. I
and
think
they
that's
buy
an
into that.
ethical.
They believe it's keeping a child, quote unquote, safe. So
Right.
where is it that parents have decided that they should hand off the safety of their children to quote unquote experts? When did that begin?
I think a lot of it was when traditional parenting methods were disparaged.
Kind of villainized.
And
Like spank.
Yeah. 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 Tell me more about that.
No, I said kind of villainized, like
Oh,
spank,
yeah.
you know,
Oh, for
like
sure.
how
For
dare you
sure.
spank a child
Oh,
and all of
oh,
the
right.
mental parenting stuff.
Right. Right. 100%. And so if we're not allowed to give tactile feedback to children,
Yeah.
if we're not allowed to touch them and give tactile feedback, then what we've done is we've taken a major portion of that child's brain that gets information, that understands cause and effect. We've taken a major portion of their brain off the table to try to influence their behavior. And I think then what that generates is helpless, frustrated parents. They're like, I don't know what to do. I'm not allowed to do what my parents did. So, and I don't have the tools to really make this work. I'm getting frustrated. My child's out of control. You take them. I think it probably wasn't 100% on purpose, like to undermine the family. Dr. Spock in 1943, Benjamin Spock, he was the one that said, guys, we don't need to keep beating our kids with a rod, literally, right? And maybe there's different ways to do it. And so that kind of started the ball rolling. All right. So the traditional methods, but then they found that permissive parenting didn't work. Um, and interestingly, if you ever want to interview a very cool guy, um, oh my gosh, now I just forgot his name. He's at Oklahoma State University. I'm sure he's officially retired, but he and a collaborator of his have a 40-year bibliography of the best research on the effects of prescribed spanking. And it is the most effective intervention for defiant children. And he has years and years and years, and the best randomized controlled trials, meta analysis. He just came out with one yesterday. It tore, not yesterday, this about a year ago, tore apart a lot of the anti-spanking crowd, tore apart their research. And I mean, I could go on about that if you want, but the prescribed spanking, which is 2 swats on the bum if they violate timeout. That's what it is. It's not belts. It's not on your face. It's not a surprise to the child. You have laid out, here's the consequences. You've violated timeout. Boom, boom. You're going back in. They have found that there are no externalizing factors later in life if it happens before age 6. Now, if you're swatting an 11-year-old, you're doing it wrong. Okay, you should have taken care of this stuff by about age 5, because for lots of reasons. So his research shows that for that window of time, a prescribed spanking for defiance of timeout is the most effective method for defiance, and it has little to no externalizing factors. They're not more depressed. They're not more angry. They're not, no, no, no. He's found this out. I've got to get his name now. I'll have to get it for you.
You just send it over to me. I will definitely reach out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I definitely was part of a generation that was, you don't spank your child. And I could have, and also because I come from such extreme abuse,
Right,
not my
right,
first choice.
right.
But I think that we would have had a whole lot more order and less chaos if I would have just from the very beginning not been afraid of discipline.
Right,
So
right. Well, and that you never want spanking to be the first. You never do. That's no research backs that up. Okay. It should be the way I tell my clients is like an iron hand and a velvet glove. Okay. The velvet glove is all of your first attempts. And the interesting thing is that gentle parenting really does work on compliant kids. It does. And so it's kind of like how parents who have oppositionally defiant children, and they're like, you don't understand. You don't understand what I'm up against. Because the gentle parenting crowd is like, you're beating, you're abusing your children. And the other parents like, you don't get it. I have a different situation here. And so I feel bad when the gentle parenting crowd condemns parents who have to use the iron hand part after all that beautiful velvet glove. Again, it's not your first thing. It's your last thing, but you have to have something of last resort. When that child is kicking you and hitting you, you have to have some way to say, this will not, I won't put up with it. Another clever thing that they'll say is, well, it's hitting. Spanking is hitting. And you have to say, well, that is the same. You need to make a distinction between spanking and hitting, because prescribed spanking, and that's what I call the, 2 swats on the bum after violating timeout. That's what I'm calling. Prescribed spanking is to hitting what prescribed medication is to street drugs. If you conflate the two, you'll be like, oh, I'm never using any kind of medicine on my child. Like, actually, there are prescribed medications that can be very, very helpful in certain times. It's not the first thing you do, but it may be needed. Same thing with the prescribed spanking. It's not the first thing, but it is not like just random abuse hitting. And in fact, that's what many of the early studies, like in the 2000s, the studies that found spanking created all these externalizing effects later in life, because they conflated it all. Anything was considered corporal punishment. And yeah, if you take a belt across your 14-year-old child's face, you bet they're going to have some huge reactions to that. But if you do the prescribed spanking as your last resort for defiance, it actually really helps that child to feel like, and here's the big secret. Most people don't know, especially the gentle parenting crowd. When a child is being defiant, and I don't just mean they're kind of ignoring you. It's like, F you, I'm not doing, and I am going to spit at you, and I am going to call you bad words, and I'm going to slam doors and not cooperate at all. Okay, that's what I mean by defiance. The defiant children, many times, they're not asking the question, do you love me? What they're asking is, they're saying, are you strong enough to contain the rage of a 5-year-old?
Right.
If you aren't strong enough to contain the rage of a 5-year-old, mom and dad, that scares me spitless, because now I'm old enough to realize the world is a big, dangerous place. I could get hit by a car. I could get kidnapped. I need to know that you, mom and dad, are strong enough to keep me safe. And so they push the boundaries, they test the boundaries to find out, are you strong enough to contain a 5-year-old tantrum? If the answer is no, if the answer is, oh, Bobby, tell me how you're feeling, it actually terrifies the child, because that's where the child can't make the distinction. They're like, I was looking for strength, and unfortunately, what I got looked really wimpy. I just broke things. I just threw things to test my boundaries, and all you did was get really soft and say, Johnny, you know what? We need to understand your emotions. That actually is so frustrating for a child who's looking for a confirmation of the strength of the parents around them. This actually goes right into the restorative justice
Exactly.
circle.
That's exactly what I was about to say, is that this
Yeah.
segue.
Yeah, very much so. Because the kids that are acting out in school are often another layer of oppositional defiant. It's one thing to have a kid at home that is, being a terror in a way. A lot of times they do okay in school. A lot of times they'll just act out at home, but they're okay at school. They, the ones that are acting out at school, most of the time, not every time, but most of the time, they're upping the ante. It's like they've tested it at home, and home looks weak. Home looks like they're caving. And so they want to test other boundaries. Well, who is going to contain me? Is it the teacher? Is it the principal? Is it the security officer at the school? And they will keep pushing until somebody goes, hey, bud, I am strong enough to contain that and handle that. I'm not going to collapse in front of you. I'm not going to be intimidated by a 14-year-old tantrum. You're safe with me. I'm not going to crush you. I'm going to contain that and say that's not acceptable. We are going to be going somewhere else to keep everybody else safe. And, we've got to do something different. So whether it's an alternative school or something, it's like you've now lost the privilege of being with that group because you violated so many social norms and so many boundaries, and you violated safety. So now we've got to take you in a different place, and then we'll work with you there.
Right.
We'll 100% work with you there, but we're not going to have the victims and the perpetrators mixing all together, because that is an absolute recipe for chaos. And I can go into that more too, but yeah.
Yes. Well, that's what we kind of need to rewind, because I think a lot of people don't even understand what restorative justice is first.
Okay.
And then it's here in Utah. So we have it codified into law. That we have restorative justice practices, which means that a lot of teachers want to do the right thing, who want to have normal classroom discipline, are not allowed to use it.
Right.
This harms the child, this harms the offender, but it also harms every single kid in the classroom.
Right.
As I've told you before, my son will sit in class and he'll go, Mom, I don't hate these kids, but I'm so disappointed in them. I feel like the parent who's saying, I'm not mad at you, I just don't understand you.
Right.
And that's one kid in a class. And I wouldn't say he is well behaved, but school is not his first priority by a long shot. But he still is like, shouldn't we have basic respect for our teachers? And instead he feels like he's being nannied as a junior. And so we got here in Utah, from what you were saying before, basically because of empathy. We want to be nice. We don't want conflict. We don't want, oh my goodness, dare I say it, contention. And we're robbing kids, in my opinion. But would you mind just giving a brief overview of what restorative justice is?
Right. Well, restorative justice was the idea was developed by a young man who went to South America. It was a little bit of a white savior type. I'm going to go down to South America and the poverty-stricken areas and see if I can figure out something that's going to help these people. And some liberals in the United States picked up on it and said, hey, let's go with it. The problem with restorative justice, the premise is that if you get the victim and the perpetrator in a circle and looking eyeball to eyeball, that the feelings will be overall, they'll be authentic, and it will result in empathy from the perpetrator to the victim. Oh man, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry I beat your face in last week and drew blood. That there will be that kind of empathy from the perpetrator to the victim, and that the perpetrator will do something to restore whatever was taken from the victim, and promise to do better, and that is going to solve the problem. That is going to solve the problem of the perpetrator wanting to perpetrate, and also the victim is going to feel better and safer. And so that's the basic premise of restorative justice.
And it has a lot to do with race. There's often this is a huge part of it. They'll say, well, Black, Brown, Indigenous people cannot control their emotions correctly because of all of their post-trauma, which is such a slap in the face and low expectations.
Right.
The bar is so low.
Right. Well, here's the deal. It's color is not the problem. Culture is the problem. And how do we change that culture? We don't want to just enable it. and say, oh, that's how they are the rest of their lives. Impulse control is a zero.
Right.
No, 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 no. That we have to say, okay, what's the culture? The first thing in the culture, the first thing that has to happen is to heal trauma. When someone has been traumatized by a perpetrator and they've been victimized by a perpetrator, there's basically 3 steps in resolving that trauma and healing that trauma. The first one is safety. Safety, safety, safety. So if you're in the middle of a hurricane, you cannot heal from the hurricane if the hurricane hasn't stopped. So what you must have for that person that's experienced the pain and the aggression or the whatever it is, the violation, what has to happen is that person has to feel safe, whatever it takes to feel safe. And that's where the onus is on making that person feel safe. The perpetrator has his own issues, but if they don't overlap, if that perpetrator is doing anything to create more angst for the victim, then we have to prioritize the pain of the innocent victim, the innocent person. Their needs have to be prioritized. They're not the ones that kicked the face in of somebody. They were the ones that were on the ground getting pummeled. Okay, so, and that's a culture thing. That's Western civilization culture that says that the aggressor, their needs must come secondary to the person, the innocent victim. Now, I think there's a lot of people that want to change that. But we have to understand this is a cultural thing. There are cultural Marxists that want to change that. They don't want perpetrators to be held responsible. That doesn't fit with them because that doesn't enable. So the first step is safety. The next step is to process or to make sense out of it. How do I make sense of the fact that I got my face bashed in by this kid? How do I make sense of that? And then the third one is to take a lemon and make lemonade out of it. And what that means is you actually take that bad experience and you figure out a way to make something good happen. So the classic example is the Amber Alert. That was Amber's parents. Amber was kidnapped and murdered, and her parents made it their step 3 to instigate a nationwide or a statewide ability to notify everybody of a kidnapped child. And so that's the recipe. That's the basic Judith Herman, classic recipe to heal from trauma. The problem with restorative justice is there's some good things about it. Like, it appeals to our empathy. It's like, oh yeah, we all want like people to get in a circle and say kumbaya. Yeah, doesn't that sound great? Okay. The problem is the devil's in the details. And to actually, when it actually is instigated, the harms that it happens. So here's some things that, the really nice sounding people that get up on their TED Talks and try to make us all feel like it's a great idea. These are some things they're not understanding. Number one is between 2 and 6% of the population are sociopaths or psychopaths. We have to understand that. There's no way around that. That is statistical reality. It doesn't take too many psychopaths and sociopaths in the school to terrify everybody. It's a terror tactic. The difference between sociopaths and psychopaths, for all intents and purposes, this is just a kind of like a rule of thumb thing, is that psychopaths enjoy making their victims, to enjoy inflicting pain. Psychopaths just don't care about your pain. They have no conscience. But they don't get their jollies from inflicting pain on you. So that's kind of the difference. So can you see in a restorative justice circle, if you have one of those kids that have those psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies in a restorative justice circle, you've got sociopathic tendencies, they'll say anything. It doesn't matter. They'll say anything out of getting out of consequences. Oh yeah, whatever. I feel really terrible. The psychopath, it's even worse because then what you have is the adults and the victim in the circle, and that psychopath gets to gets to confront their victim again and see that pain, and that actually gives them this amoral satisfaction that a psychopath enjoys. So what you're doing in that restorative justice circle is you are giving that psychopath exactly what they want, and you are putting that uh, you're putting that child in danger, the victim, the innocent child. You're putting them in victim danger of being re-traumatized again by the same person. Just having to look them in the eyes while someone is like, yeah, enjoying your pain. So, am I saying that's every child? No, it's not. It's like the gentle parenting thing. Okay. Gentle parenting and restorative justice might work on a significant number of just nice kids that were stressed, you know. But for the children who have the patterns, the culture, the patterns in their culture are one of violence and retribution and non-empathy and um, retribution and just doing what works for them, very self-centered, um, then the restorative justice is not really going to meet their needs.
Well, I think
There,
that we
go
never
ahead.
think about is the facilitators can also be the psychopaths or the sociopaths. And I mean, watch a DEI training. There are people
Yeah.
who very much enjoy humiliating others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And they do it with one of the things I noticed is like their tone of voice so
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
so it's so trained
mm-hmm.
false empathy, right?
Yeah. Well, it's plausible deniability. I'm just trying to help you, you know?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it oftentimes, again, and I understand that psychopaths and sociopaths are not a racial issue, but when
Mm-hmm,
it comes to DEI, it tends to be that those are the people who are in there enjoying the fact that they can
mm-hmm,
claim their Black, Hispanic, Indigenous people, whateverness. And
mm-hmm,
because of that, you guys are wrong and we are right.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
the reality is that there are adults who cannot handle these kind of
Right,
restorative justice things.
right.
Because I really do, and I called it on this restorative injustice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It seems like a great injustice, not only um, to the victimized person, the oppressed person, quote unquote oppressed, but also to the victimizer. Because as we were talking once before, and you had said, they're craving those boundaries and they just continue to look further, reach
Push.
out, do
Mm-hmm,
more
mm-hmm,
because they need someone to stand
mm-hmm,
up for them. And when we were
mm-hmm,
having our meeting, and the one teacher was saying administrators don't support teachers because they, quite frankly, I think they don't want to deal with it. And
mm-hmm,
oftentimes they're true believers as well
mm-hmm,
because it has a cult-like following.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So where did that flip? Because I think one of the reasons that parents don't really want to see it or pretend that it's not there is because it wasn't there when they were kids.
Mm-hmm.
So from what I understand, it started with a dear colleague letter.
Yeah, yeah, that was a big one.
Can you expand on that? Like where that
Well, yeah, basically, the Dear Colleague letter said that we have disproportionate disciplinary actions on different races. And so, for that reason, we need to do what we can to make sure that they're not disproportionate. So, do whatever you have to get the stats so that they look better. That was basically, yeah, the premise of it. Well, so then restorative justice, what it does is that it dumbs down the disciplinary the bar for getting disciplined, and so you have less suspensions, you have less expulsions because nothing meets that bar anymore. That doesn't mean you have less violence. You just have less suspensions.
oh, discipline helps people learn, especially young people. It
Yeah,
helps them get to the point where they can make decisions that change their lives for the better.
right, right.
A
And
small
I,
discipline, like getting, sorry, my dog is freaking out next to me, but the small discipline of a child, a third grader, having a timeout and learning from it, going,
mhm,
oh, I missed out on that fun thing,
mhm,
got in
mhm,
trouble, is a
mhm.
whole lot better than your uh 11th grader or senior. Usually a lot of times these kids are not seniors. They don't make it to that point.
Right, 100%. Yeah, and again, see, that's a cultural issue because if you've got kids coming into a public school system that are not prepared to control their impulses, that are not prepared to direct their focus, they're not prepared. This is a cultural issue. And if they're not prepared, then the mismatch with the system of public school and that culture of that child is it's going to be it's not going to help anybody. And so really the ideal is not to mainstream to mainstream the violence. Don't mainstream the violence, which is really the uh, what the restorative justice does. It's like keep them there, don't don't suspend them, don't expel them, keep them right in that school system. When you mainstream the violence like that, it destroys the public school system, which was built on the premise of the public school system is built on it's built on the premise of a culture that values impulse control, that values conformity to adult requests, and being able to work things out without fists, you know.
Right.
Um, and that's the only way the public school system has ever been able to manage is if the children bring a culture of obedience, respect, hard work, focus, and impulse control. It won't work if you're mainstreaming violence. It
Right.
simply will not work. And we're seeing now these so many teachers who are saying, I'm out. I cannot deal with this.
Right.
The threats, the violence, the intimidation. I have ulcers. I have nightmares. I have PTSD about the kids in my class. We're not learning.
Right.
And so you have to understand safety is the very first. When we've got kids coming in, again, I'm not talking about color. I'm talking about culture.
Right.
They don't know how to compose. And frankly, there's a lot of kids coming in school now, you know, their parents are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Okay, doesn't matter.
Middle class, upper
They,
middle class families. Yeah.
exactly. They have not learned to control their impulses, and
Right.
they've been diagnosed as ODD or diagnosed as ADD and every ADHD, and they're no more prepared than someone in inner city Chicago,
A lot of
except maybe. Go ahead.
a lot of specifically mothers seem to want that diagnosis.
Oh, 100%.
Like
Yeah.
it makes them, I mean, I do, maybe this isn't the correct term. I'm not any kind of a professional in this, but I call it a form of Munchausen. You want your child to be sick so that you can feel important or special in the way that you take care of them.
Well, it doesn't even have to go that extreme. Now, I think some parents that really get into their children being trans, I
Yeah.
think I think that is right. I think that's an issue. I think for the average parent, though, one of the useful pieces of having your child receive a diagnosis is because it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And so if my child has something biologically wrong, it's not my fault.
Right.
And there's a huge sense of relief because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, okay, I'm not a lousy parent.
Yeah.
My child is just got something, organically wrong. And so I just ask for accommodations for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Which again, I think is such a disservice to the kids.
Right.
How about, so psychopaths and sociopaths, are they born that way, or can we condition healthy children to become that way? Because it does seem to me that we definitely are conditioning narcissism.
Right. Right. That's a great question. That's a little bit the chicken and the egg thing, but like every child, the autistic children, ADHD children, oppositional children, um, all children, if they are in a healthy family system, this is kind of why they have foster care, right? But they can absolutely learn new skills, new ways of new core beliefs about themselves and the world that really does change, it changes their impulse control, it changes their decision making. It really can help. Now, are you going to take a kid that is severely autistic from 0 to 100? No. But you can take them from 0 to 15 by saying, we are going to insist on such and such things.
Right.
And that's an improvement. Guess what? We can all improve. Everybody. So the whole point is it kind of doesn't matter where you start. We all can improve if we have good discipline, high expectations, um, a feeling of benevolent authority, respecting each other's boundaries. I feel safe. And here's another one. Interestingly, they found that one of the best things you can do for oppositional defiant behavior in school is to teach the children to actually read. Most often, these kids are not reading. They're just hopeless. And so they act out. So that's an interesting thing too, right? If we can just teach them to read, it helps so much because most children, they want to be happy, healthy, independent. That's what they want. They don't want to be in jail. They don't want to be excluded, but they don't have the tools. They don't have the support. So first we have to keep everybody safe. And if that means, we separate and give them the attention that they need, the structure that they need.
Right.
Now, I agree with the restorative justice people. A lot of times, if you just randomly expel a child and they go back to their, problem neighborhood that is rife with gangs, it's not going to be the best thing. Okay. But that's not the only choice. We have options. The option is, yes, you take that child and you put them in an alternative environment where they are getting the attention, the guidance, the structure that they need to make some good decisions. Are you doing better? Great. Let's, on a conditional kind of probationary period, let's see how you do. Put you back in.
Right.
If the victim feels like, okay, they've done whatever needs to be done to help me feel safe. But that's a different process than restorative justice.
Well, it's so interesting because we talk about things um like safety, right? But these words can be weaponized.
Right.
Safety is weaponized. SEL is hugely weaponized.
Right.
We
Right.
that, oh, this is how we're going to control the behaviors of our kids.
Right.
We're going to control something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're literally completely controlling the person. And it just seems like we're applying a lot of worst practices as best.
Mm-hmm.
A child who is struggling, a child who has not had successes needs to have success.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to have success by having a high standard set
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then being given the tools and the support to reach
Mm-hmm.
high standard. If your first high standard is today you're not hitting anyone,
Mm-hmm.
great. That's
Mm-hmm.
a huge high standard for somebody
Mm-hmm.
who has no impulse control.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Instead of saying, well, what are the reasons why you might? No, just
Right.
we're not going to hit anyone.
Right.
And the same thing with reading. We have these things that we call high level reading, but this high level reading is not reading high quality books.
Mm-hmm.
We're now changing what that means to reading books that teach activism. So of the point of school now is
Right.
activism, activism, activism. Oh, you need a counselor? Well, you really need to figure out why all of these things have happened to you and how you can dismantle the systems of injustice.
Right.
And I would encourage anybody who watches this later or is watching it now to go through and watch some of the restorative justice videos, the TED Talks on YouTube. They always go to activism. This is the focus of our kids. And I've never seen, quite frankly, a leftist activist
Mm-hmm.
isn't mentally unwell.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like they're intentionally making the kids unwell. I don't know if they're doing that on purpose, but it sure
Mm-hmm.
seems to me when I watch some of these people that they're flat out sadistic.
Well, I think that there's a lot of power in manipulating people who are emotionally vulnerable,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they they aren't hesitant to leverage that,
Right.
and they are, and it is such a tragedy because you could take that same victim of a tough upbringing, right? And instead of programming them to, be a victim, you have an external locus of control. Nothing you do is going to help. Nothing you do is going to stick it to the man. And so all you can do is protest and tear down everything around you as some kind of venting of your pain. Um, that's such a missed opportunity because we can look we can look hard things in the eye. No kidding, your mom was a drug addicted, you know, person with impulse control problems.
Right.
Yes. Yes, you were beaten. Yes. And what are you going to do now?
Exactly.
If you have power to change your life. You don't have to change the whole world. You yourself have the power to make decisions. And if we gave that message, we could look things straight in the eye and be 100% truthful. No kidding, it's hard. And when you overcome that, you're the biggest hero ever. That is more heroic than the kid that comes from upper middle class family and goes to Harvard. Well, big whoop. But you look at JD Vance and you're like, yeah, that guy's based.
Right.
That guy did it. It can happen, right?
Exactly.
And just think of so many people of color that have overcome, but they don't get the publicity. They certainly are not in the textbooks. And and it's such a disservice to these kids because these kids absolutely can learn. The maybe 2% are just like, yeah, sorry, you really are going to need to be institutionalized because the violence is just incorrigible.
Right.
But the vast, vast, vast majority of children that are struggling can learn to overcome things. But people, as you say, have to have the high expectations and the scaffolding to create successes.
Right.
And you build on the success. And you don't just say, yeah, sucks to be you, don't even try. Because that's what a terrible, terrible message. If someone told me that growing up, I would be a mess too. Nobody can take that. It doesn't matter what color you are. It's the culture of hope. It's the culture of overcoming tough things. That's the culture we need.
Let's wrap up with some hope because there are so many parents who are like, well, what do I do? How do I find a good therapist? What
Right.
can I do if therapy isn't what I want to do? Like, how can
Right.
I just improve within my own family?
Right.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So, if you think about how the parents raised the greatest generation, how did the parents raise the greatest generation? That generation that won World War II, came back and rebuilt, just everything. I mean, those years were really something. Um, what did those parents do? Just think about it. Number one, most of them were attached to a church. Most of them had an existential belief system in God that in the end will make everything right. And there's that hope. Even if you had a lousy life, that there is always hope for the next world. Okay. There's something about that existential hope that changes a person's life. When you have the atheistic nihilism, nothing matters, suffering is pointless, then that changes everything. So I would say number one is you as a family attached to some kind of faith, especially an organized religion with a congregation. Why? Why is that? Why is it not just as good to go up on a mountain and meditate and think of good things? Because that congregation is your social support network. They get you. You get them. You understand. You serve them. They serve you. They know your kid. You know their kids. You're there for each other. You're sick. They come bring food, right? Um, they judge you and you forgive them, right? It's this beautiful laboratory
Right.
of life, but they are your secondary family, and the faith, whether it's Muslim, Catholic, Jewish, Mormon, Protestant, whatever that faith is, Hindu, right? Whatever it is, it makes meaning out of suffering, that you can see that suffering and saying, I can make an interpretation. The way I interpret this suffering is there's meaning in it. And so I can push through and make a good world. So that would be my number one thing, is recapture faith and organized religion.
Can
I
I
frankly am not, I don't care which one. What?
Right. So Alexis de Tocqueville, right? He came here. He
Mhm.
was not a man of faith, but he saw value in the churches anyways. So I know that there will be people who are like, you just pushed religion on me. There's reason. All of those things that you said matter, even if it's a social circle that
Yep.
doesn't necessarily see that, but it's like a cultural, like,
Yep.
like a cultural center, but you have to be
Right.
careful that the progressive agenda is not weaved through it.
Exactly. Exactly. Because that many churches have been co-opted by
Yes.
that false, that weaponized empathy. And
Yes.
so they water down the doctrine, right?
Yes.
Um, and so you have to find one that's a good match for you. Um, and the science, the research backs it up.
Right.
The research backs it up, that teenagers and children who come from a family that go to regular meetings, that espouse organized religion and the tenets of the faith,
Right.
they do better. They thrive.
Right.
And so I've said to people, I'm like, you know what? Even if I didn't believe all this, I would do it just to have 30 other adults care about my kid.
Yeah.
You
Right.
can't pay a government bureaucracy to do that. If
No.
you think CPS is going to do that, that you have it all wrong. So that'd be the first one. The other one is do your very, very best to keep your marriage together, and if at all possible, extended family. Um, and do what you can. My great grandmother used to say, any kind of a friend is better than an enemy. Now, technically, that's not true. You can have subversive friends, but what she's saying is you can be civil and relate to everybody on some level to benefit your children, to keep those relationships in the extended family as much as you can, because they also are a support system. Maybe your teenager isn't listening to you, but they'll listen to your sister.
Right.
Yeah. And so that kind of stuff, very, very important. Um, the other thing, if you're thinking about therapy, make sure that you ask the questions. And there's nothing wrong with saying, so do you believe that there's more than two? Do you believe in biological sex, or do you believe in genders? And see what they say. Ask them the hard questions. Just see what they say. And if it doesn't feel right to you, you're like, yeah, I don't think so. Thanks. It's been great. You interviewed them, right? And you say, what do you do if the child really wants to do something way different than the culture of the family? Do you honor the culture of the family, or do you help the child separate from the culture of the family? That would be an interesting question too. What would you do to keep me in the loop? What could you do to keep me in the loop? And how could you help my relationship with my child? How are we going to do that? Those would be very important questions to ask. Now, interestingly, I have my big project for this year is called Family for Real, and it's on Instagram. It's family.for.real. And what we do is we provide coaching, we provide workshop coaching for anybody, anybody. There's no money required. So if you're having trouble, we have parenting workshop, marriage workshop.
Online
If
or
you're
in person?
It's in Zoom. It's Zoom workshops.
Okay.
Right. So it can be any, right. And Carrie, I'll send you a link that you can post, but you can look it up on Instagram. And we want it so that anybody that wants the support can get it. Simply reading a book won't change your family. And looking at bullet points and posts on Instagram will not change your family. But a workshop situation where you've got 30 other people in there and they hear your story, you hear their story, you make goals, you set goals, and they go, okay, this is my goal. You actually are each other's accountability buddy during the week. You're like, how'd you do? I yelled at my kids. Okay. Here's what we're taught to do, blah, blah, blah. And, we're going to have the workshop in a few more days. We're going to troubleshoot that. It's almost like a congregation to support you, because so many parents feel alone. They feel like, I don't know what to do. I'm too ashamed to tell people that I'm intimidated by my 14-year-old kid. I don't know what to do. And so we have a group that does these workshops, and there's no money required. Now, we will accept donations. Or if it's like, I don't have a penny to my name, then what we encourage you to do, because it's good for us all to have skin in the game, right? We don't want to be just takers. That doesn't do right. We don't feel good. So you can also contribute service. And we actually talk about that in the workshop too. Contribute service. And that's a way to support the cause too. So hopefully that gives people some options, because I think the very people that could benefit the very most it's a barrier because of money or time. I can't leave my home. I can't leave my job to get therapy.
Right.
And so this is, to me, a really innovative solution. I'm really excited. I hope, maybe if it's not something that appeals to you, you've got a daughter-in-law, you've got a friend, and you're like, listen, there's no money required. And these are professional mentors.
So we have an affiliate link with Moms for America. And I would love to put your info down on the bottom of that so that people reach out, because we want to just be the biggest support group that we can for families, really.
Yes.
For keeping families intact and avoiding the Marxist takeover that is absolutely in mental health.
Yes.
I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate you just spelling it out and being so just genuine and not like high level where nobody can understand, right? Important that people get this information. And I just appreciate that you're an expert in this and that you have taken the time. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Carrie, you are a gem. If only we had 50 of you.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you so
much.
much.
Yeah, you're the best. All right. Thank you for inviting me on. I hope to hear from some of your listeners, and people will get in on these workshops and get excited about Moms for America. I mean, this is such a great thing. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. You're awesome. Okay. Bye-bye.